we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to September's virtual Parlor chat. This is a rare occasion in which I have nothing to plug too much on the mansion side as far as programs go. Of course, we always have Family Day on the second Saturday. But other than that, we're just doing a whole lot of paranormal programming this spooky season. We are officially completely sold out for September and October. But if you were not able to grab your tickets, you can always join our waitlist. It's on our website and in the gift shop. They get first access. I'm believing in doing more paranormal programming than we have in the past during the winter, since we do only have that one little chunk of time to get spooky. So keep an eye out for that. But instead, we can talk about this brand new exhibition that is opening this Saturday, September 23rd, which will be Past Present with Bruce Katz, and I will tell you a little bit about him. So Bruce Katz is an architect, portrait, and fine art photographer based in New York City, working regularly for a diverse clientele. Over a 40-year career, his work has appeared in Architectural Digest, New York Magazine, Landscape Architecture, and The Washington Post, as well as for top hospitality, design, and advertising firms throughout the country. Sky High, a critique of NYC's super tall towers from top to bottom, for which he photographed the newest skyscrapers and the skyline, was published by Princeton Architectural Press in June of 2023. Over his career, he has presented stories of the built environment to the viewer, focusing on showing spaces not readily available to the public or depicting public spaces in a new light, allowing viewers to gain a better understanding of architecture, design, landscape, and habitation. His 2018 exhibition, Elevated Lines at Inwood Artworks Gallery, was a survey of NYC's working class neighborhoods as seen from the elevated subway stations. Other select shows include Photoville in Brooklyn, Staten Island Unlimited at the Alice Austin House Museum, and SPF 16 at the Arsenal Gallery in Manhattan. His work can be found in the permanent collection of the New York Historical Society. Bruce has taught at the International Center for Photography in New York and served on the board of directors of the American Society of Media Photographers. So we are very, very excited to talk with him tonight and to have this new exhibition. So Bruce, if you want to take it away.
Thank you for that introduction. I am delighted to be here, and I want to thanks to Maddie and Catherine Hughes for making all this possible. I want to talk a little bit about this, specifically about this project, how it came about, what I'm really trying to accomplish with the photographs that I'm going to share in the exhibition, which opens Saturday, and I'm really excited about that. I've been working on the project for a better part of the year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the work up on the walls. Past Present, a little bit of the background of the project. The former executive director of Morris-Jumel, Shiloh Holly, had approached me several years ago about doing a project where we took the Morris-Jumel, the house was built in 1765, a time when all of northern Manhattan was farmland, and how to relate it to the 20th century, 21st century city that we see now, particularly through photographs. How would you begin to tell that story of the transition of the neighborhood from farm to, the diverse community of Washington Heights and northern Manhattan that we see now? So one of the biggest things that we were trying to figure out is, what could we photograph? What, if anything, still exists from 1765? Really, there's only a couple of things that do exist. You have the mansion itself, which is a fantastic record of the history of the city. It's one of the few oldest surviving structures in New York, Manhattan. And then you've got maps and stuff that document the property that go back to the 1800s. Of course, the geology, the area itself, the rocks and everything that underlay New York have been a constant. They haven't changed for millions of years. But even the river on both sides has been built out, and trees come and go. So there's actually very little to photograph from 1765. And the mansion itself, I didn't concentrate on photographing the mansion itself. We wanted to tell the story of the history of the property. So one of the things that we did was go back through the historical record, and for me, this was all new. I didn't study much in the way of history when I was in school, but this particular project turned me into a little bit of a historian, or using the tools of historians. And there's a fantastic map that you'll see up on my screen now, that was done by the Museum of the City of New York. And what they did was there was circa 1800, the surveyor for the city of New York, Randall, Randel, surveyed all of Manhattan, and outlined the farms that existed up here. And let's zoom in a little bit. You can see where the green crosses are. If we zoom in on this a little bit, you can see the outline of the property. And this is Stephen Gemel's property, circa 1811. But the really wonderful thing that the Museum of the City of New York did with these maps is they georectified them, and they laid it out over the current city grid in a digital form, so that you can take a slider and move back and forth to the city grid that we all know and see today, the streets, and you can go back to the borders of the property in the 1800s. So the reason I'm showing you this is because much of the work that I photographed for this project came from studying these maps, finding areas on the property that might have been significant structures. If we zoom in a little closer, I don't know whether everybody can see this. Let me come in just a little tighter. You see here by my cursor, it says dwelling house. This is Morris-Jumel Mansion. You see over here, it says barns and stables. And then now if we move the slider, you can see that the barns and stables are on 162nd Street. So obviously the barns and stables are no longer there, but what is there is actually the Morris-Jumel Community Gardens. So that gave me an idea of, this is what I'm gonna photograph. Obviously I can't go back in time. And I had no desire to, but the idea of figuring out where significant parts of the property were back in 1800s or even beyond, and then photographing what's there now. It's a before and after, but there really isn't much before. It's not like a makeover where somebody's trying on new clothes. It looks radically different in most cases. So that's kind of the conceit of the show. So I drew from primarily this amazing map that the Museum of the City of New York put out. And here I'm just going to scroll up a little further. And this is the northern part of the northwestern part of the property. And if we go to the street grid, you'll see that, sorry, come down a little bit. This is the northwest corner of the Jumel property as it existed in 1811, 1820. And you'll see that it's J. Hood Wright Park at about, between Fort Washington and Haven Avenue. I would assume that many of you that are listening are familiar with Northern Manhattan, but if you're not, this is the heart of Washington Heights. So that was really the idea, is to take the historical record, figure out where the property was and what's there now and what's worth photographing now. I did it from these maps. There are some other amazing documents that we reference, which I'll go through, some drawings from the Revolutionary War that show Morris-Jumel Mansion. And then there's photographs and paintings as we move into the late 19th and 20th century. So that provided the foundation for the past part of it. And then this is just a still frame of that, which I think it might be a little clearer to see the extent of the Jumel property as it existed in about 1811. And here you can see, the roadways, the Harlem River Drive. If you look carefully, the borders, the river, all of this now is landfill. This is public housing, the polo grounds. Up here is, you'll see shortly, this is where the George Washington Bridge is. And over here is where the High Bridge crossing, the old aqueduct is. And this is the extent of the property. So as I started thinking about what I was going to photograph, I really tried to put myself in Stephen Jumel's shoes and kind of walk the property and see what areas would have like the best views of the river, and try to imagine him standing there, or on horseback looking out at the river, or surveying his own property in 1811. This is the northwest corner of his property. It's the Hudson River. Whoops, sorry. George Washington Bridge, Hudson River, Fort Lee. And this is from J. Hood Wright Park. Now, it took me a while to kind of figure out how I wanted to photograph this project from an aesthetic point of view. I knew I wanted to work in color. Most everything I do these days is color. I love square format. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the visual language of the photography for this project was going to be. And the first images I made of this project were from here, but there was a lot of stuff that ended up bothering me. And the biggest thing was that you're overlooking the on-ramp to the GW Bridge, and it's always just chock full of traffic. And I didn't want to retouch out cars, and I didn't want to change anything, but I was trying to figure a way to minimize the presence of automobiles and people. And so after a while of experimenting, I realized that by using, for those familiar with photography, a slow shutter speed where the traffic and the things that are moving become blurry. So you have a feel of the presence of them there, but you don't see them. You can't pick out whether it's a Toyota Camry or a panel truck. This was a convention that seemed to work with the first image, and it was something I was able to use as I was photographing this project. So it's kind of a recurring theme, the idea of adding motion and minimizing the presence of cars. Didn't get rid of them, but it really just gives you a feel of the bustle of the city without the having to, look at the cars themselves. So again, this is the northwest corner of the Jumel property, circa 1800, looking west. On the map we just saw, this is the community gardens, the Morris-Jumel community gardens, which are at 162nd and St. Nicholas, or just in from St. Nicholas. And this is where the old barns were. And so for this particular image, it's kind of nice that what was barns and stable on a farm in the 1800s is still, they're still growing things. It's a garden. They're growing tomatoes and plants, and it's a lovely space to share greenery. And the folks at the garden were kind enough to let me spend a few hours there photographing it for the project. So past, present, obviously, there's a little bit of synchronicity here where the current use of this land is similar to what it would have been, in the 1800s. That is, it's a garden, and they're growing vegetables. This is another perspective. This is the southeast corner of the property on 155th Street, kind of the overpass as you go down to the McCombs Dam Bridge, looking back towards the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And this is one of the few images where you could actually reference the actual Morris-Jumel Mansion in it. Most other views all around the property, you can't see the mansion anymore. It's hidden by trees, it's hidden by other buildings. There's no vistas to look at it. But this shows how the city has grown up around it. This would have been the waterfront, or below, this bluff here. This is actually, I believe, Coogan's Bluff. This is the Polo Grounds housing, Polo Grounds housing projects, which are built over the old Polo Grounds for all you sports fans, which were home of the Yankees, Giants, and even the Mets for a brief season in '63. But you can really see the stark transformation: public housing, all the apartment buildings, Edgecombe Avenue over here, and Morris-Jumel. And you would have, in 1811, you would have been oystering and fishing down there, or putting goods to ship down to Lower Manhattan, from the orchards, from the farm. This is the northeast corner of the property, which is currently, it's High Bridge Park. This is the High Bridge. It's reopened 2015 to pedestrian traffic. It's the old Croton Aqueduct that brought water into the city. Right next to where the camera is set up for this is the High Bridge Tower pumping station, and it was a reservoir that gave New York all its water. And this is looking east over the Bronx. Again, this is the Major Deegan Expressway, and this is as industrial city as you're going to get. It's the Metro North Railway. They're renovating, I guess, the tracks and stuff down there. It's a big construction site. But this is where Stephen Jumel would have stood to take in the view of the Harlem River in the 1800s, when it looked much, much different. The other thing that I drew from was artwork. Ernest Lawson, I believe Hudson River School painter, painted a lot in this area of Manhattan. And this painting, I believe, was done in 1910 or so. So you can already see across the Harlem River here. Here's the High Bridge again. You can see that there is much more activity here. This would have been a very active fishing and commerce. You see the schooners and the tugboat along the Harlem River there. So I drew from these paintings as well, and I have to give a little shout out to my neighbors Don Rice and Cole Thompson, who are local historians. And when I was talking to them about this project, they were like, "Oh, you need to look up Ernest Lawson's paintings. They're magnificent, and he's painted all along the river." So they became the basis for sort of the before shots that I'm revisiting here. And again, this is not the exact same angle. I didn't feel it necessarily to try and duplicate these images, although I did that with one shot that we'll get to later. But again, the High Bridge, and you can see basically the modern city. I also made it a point of really not trying to beautify what we were seeing. One of the things that I didn't see until I started editing the film is, somebody tossed a pair of sneakers into the tree, as it's hazing some kid and tossing his sneakers up into the tree. This is again High Bridge Park, so I didn't. It doesn't bother me. In fact, it's kind of it's the little things that make New York, New York. There's always this beautiful vista, and there's a pile of trash somewhere, or somebody hasn't cleaned up after themselves. So I didn't feel it necessary to retouch that stuff out. It's part and parcel of the story that I'm telling. And this is one of the most fun things that I got to do in this project. This is called the dinosaur elm. It's an English elm, but this is one of the oldest trees in the city. It's on 163rd, 164th and St. Nick. It's on the corner. It's kind of public housing, very nondescript, 3-4 story public housing behind it. But this tree is over 300 years old. So the Park Service claims that George Washington watched the burning of the city from under this tree. I don't know how you would prove that one way or the other. There's no written record of Washington talking about standing under this particular elm. But it is on what would have been the Morris property of that day. And Morris-Jumel is just a couple of blocks away. And to think that this tree has survived for 300 years is really kind of an amazing thing. I mean, when you consider that for the last 100 years, it's on a major avenue, and that between storms and everything else, that it's I don't know about worrying about what it witnessed, but the fact that it's survived is it really just tickles me. And what I did with this is shot it in in as many seasons I could. So I started in winter. I was really hoping to get a nice blizzard this last year, and we got no snow at all. So I couldn't shoot it in the snowfall, so it exists as kind of bare branches, early spring, and just the nature of this project, I needed to finish things up before I could get there for the fall. But I did, it's just, I'm just tickled that this tree exists and you can walk by it. But, folks that live in the neighborhood, they seem to pay no attention to this tree at all. But it's there, and it's a fascinating thing to go look at, and to think that it was probably 50 years old during the Revolutionary War. It's kind of mind-boggling in a lot of ways. This is an undated photograph of, let me read you the caption. It says, a few of the African cypress trees cut down 1909, imported and planted in 1850 about the Jumel Fish Pond, now 159th Street, between St. Nicholas and Edgecombe Avenue. Now, this came from a history that was done of the Morris-Jumel Mansion at the turn of the century, 1903, I think, done by let me get the title of the document right. It's the Historical Sketch of Washington's Headquarters, prepared by Washington Headquarters Association by Emma Smith, Chair, 1908. And this was about the time that Morris-Jumel was purchased to be a museum by the city of New York. And basically it was the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, that prepared a historical treaty on the mansion. And so this undated photo is of these cypress trees at 159th and St. Nick. And this is what's there now. This is, kind of a generic apartment building that's on the corner. It's kind of very jarring to think that, there's this lovely fish pond and 100-year-old cypress trees, and now we have, sidewalk and apartment buildings. Now, this is the view from Eliza Jumel's bedroom up on the second floor of Morris-Jumel Mansion. I really didn't shoot that much on the mansion, but the inspiration for this is, it turns out it's twofold. One is in that same document, the historical document, I just want to read. They went back and they found a real estate listing of the sale of the property from 1765. This is when Colonel Morris would have bought the place as his summer retreat. And let me just read this briefly. It's a pleasant, situated farm on the road leading to Kingsbridge in the township of Harlem of York Island, containing about 100 acres, about 30 of which is woodland, fine piece of meadow ground, and may be easily made. Commands the finest prospect in the whole country. The land runs from river to river. There is fishing, oystering, and clamming at either end. And it goes on. But it's just amazing to me that, we have a record of the real estate listing of the sale of the property from 1765. And one of the things that I do in my commercial career is I'm often photographing expensive or high designed office property for the architects or developers. And one of the things we do habitually is, it's great office space. It has magnificent views of the Hudson River or that kind of thing. So this image is kind of a little bit of a tip of the hat to this real estate listing from 1765. It's really a view of looking out. You can't see the river anymore. This is the Polo Ground houses. Edgecombe Avenue is down here. But it's something that, obviously photography didn't exist in 1765, but certainly real estate listings did. So it's kind of my tip of the hat to doing a photograph of a real estate listing. But it also relates, this was one of the biggest thrills about doing this project. was, again, I had mentioned a friend of mine, local historian, Don Rice, who was doing a talk on the Battle of Fort Washington. And there are some amazing drawings that were done by British Army officer Thomas Davies that he did of the battle, and we'll see that in a few minutes. But the battle was lost by Washington, and the British and the Hessians took over what was the Morris House at this time. This would have been 1777, 1776. And this is probably the oldest known drawing that was done on the property. This is, by looking at the rocks here, was probably just a little east of the actual mansion, down the hill here on what's now Edgecombe Avenue, looking south. This is the Harlem River. Back in those days, the river, there was an inlet that went in. This has all been filled in now. It doesn't exist. It's all landfill now. But as far as I knew, when I spoke to both Holly, the former executive director, and the current director, Catherine, no one knew that this piece of artwork, this document of the drawn literally from the front yard of Morris-Jumel, even existed. So it was kind of a thrill for me to be able to deliver this. I can't say I found it. It was Don Rice's history and his work. But to make it known to the folks at Morris-Jumel was quite a thrill. And this is my version. This is shot not far from where that was drawn, but this is the river looking south today. And obviously, you know, this is the Metro North train yard here, downtown Manhattan, the McCombs Dam Bridge, Willis Avenue Bridge, Yankee Stadium is down here. And this was a photograph from Highbridge Park, which was the part of the Jumel property in the 1800s. This is the other document I was referring to. This is a drawing of the Battle of Fort Washington from, it's dated November 16th, 1776, done by Thomas Davies, British Army officer. And this is all of northern Manhattan. Folks that live up here will recognize this would be where Dyckman Street is. Fort Tryon is here. Fort Washington would have been up here. But interestingly, in the very corner, Morris House, Morris-Jumel Mansion, is right here. This was one of the first things that I ran into when we were kind of going through the history of the property. And I was trying to figure out where he would have stood to draw this. And after spending a lot of time driving back and forth in the Bronx along the Harlem River on Sedgwick Avenue and in and around there, it turns out that this is about where Bronx Community College now stands, which is a wonderful campus. And was able to get permission to go up on top of one of the buildings and this is the one image that I did that was, I tried to be as exact as I could in both proportions and show how the city looks today. So kind of a real before and after. Before, after. Now you can see that Colonel Thomas Davies, I don't know if there was Colonel, was liberal with his drawing in terms of perspective and scale. But everything that you can see in his drawing of the Battle of Fort Washington, you can see here. This is Dyckman. You can see the Palisades, the inlet here. the school at the edge of, I forget what PS it is, but this is Dyckman Houses, power station, former Con Ed station. And Morris-Jumel would be right here where the cursor is. What's really interesting about this image, comparing it back to the other image, is, I mean, one of the things that struck me is that in 2023, this was shot back in August, it may be a little deceiving, but the New York City is really green. This is mostly Highbridge Park, but all along the waterfront here is Roberto Clemente State Park. There's so much green. And you look back at this image, and it's not just because it's November with bare trees, but there's just far fewer trees. And then you realize that they were clear cutting for the farms. They were clear cutting for building the forts and defenses and fuel. So they did a tremendous, and to build the defenses, the redoubts and things that were part of the Revolutionary War. And to me, this is you know, the city looks in a lot of ways remarkably the same, at least, you know, geologically and structure. You can really see everything that you could see in a drawing from 1776. So this one image is a little bit of an outlier. As I said, everything else was in a square format, and I really tried to do A and a B with this image. But that I hope gives you an idea of how I approached photographing for this project. Obviously, there's a lot more imagery in the show, but I just wanted to give you a taste and a little bit of how and what I was thinking when I was photographing this project. And basically it came down to one thing, which is putting myself in the shoes of Stephen and Eliza Jumel as they walked their property in the 1800s, and tipping my hat to the folks that painted the neighborhood and stuff as we moved up to the 20th century, the Polo Grounds and what's there now, and giving some of that some context. So with that, I think I'll hand it back to Maddie, and hopefully there's a little bit of insight, and I hope you all come by and actually see the show when it opens Saturday, or it'll be up through, I think, February of 24. So.
Yes. So we'll open it up to questions now. So if any of y'all have questions, just pop those in the Q&A. But I'll actually start with a question. So there were a bunch of times that I'm looking at these and I'm like, I have walked past that, like the tree. I walk past that all the time whenever the C decides not to come, and I have to walk to 168th for the A.
Right.
And I had no idea. So I was curious, like, which one sort of surprised you the most?
Of the photographs that I did?
Yeah, like which sort of like whatever you like uncovered, like if anything, like completely.
I think that there were the two big surprise. I mean, to me, the tree, I just fell in love with that tree. I just love the idea that there's a 300-year-old tree sitting in the middle of northern Manhattan that people pay little or no attention to, but that it survived. To me, it's just crazy that that's still around. But I think the two things that struck me the most was really was really these two images. It's very rare that, you know, you get a document like this where literally, I'll read the caption. It's a view of the attack against Fort Washington and rebel redouts near New York on the 16th of November, 1776 by British and Hessian brigades, drawn by, and I can't see his rank, uh, but Thomas Davies, of the captain of the artillery. So, here's the battle photographer, and he documented much of the Revolutionary War here in New York. And, to be able to kind of reprise this image in current day, and that it's really recognizable. And I think the thing that struck me the most was how green the city feels. It's a little bit of a false sense because, when you get into the heart of the neighborhood, northern Manhattan and Washington Heights, a lot of it doesn't feel that green, but yet, the city parks and, one of the reasons I live in Inwood, which is, just a little north of here. So, I consider all this my neighborhood. And one of the reasons we moved here was because of Inwood Hill Park and Fort Tryon. And, we had easy access to a lot of green space. And it can't be overestimated how green space in a city becomes a soothing and a wonderful thing. And I think that's what surprised me most is this particular, before and after image. I was much more expecting, the old fish pond and kind of a very generic, working class apartment building. There were other things that stood out, but most of it is I was expecting. I don't think I expected to feel this way about this particular image.
Cool. So Susan is curious to know what was the most challenging research. So like researching the sites or actually executing the photography?
They were both challenging, and I say that kind of with a smile. Most of my professional career, I am dealing in the present. I am photographing, or documenting New York City in a variety of fashions. The aesthetics of what I photographed here really came out of this elevated lines project that I undertook for myself back in 2016, where I traveled every inch of the elevated subway lines in Manhattan and photographed the city from the stations, kind of a commuter's eye view of the city. And but it's all in the present. It's you have new buildings going up, you have a fire destroying some warehouse in Brooklyn, or the being a historian is something that's well out of my pay scale. But I was lucky to both be steered by the collection that's at Morris-Jumel, and God bless the internet. You can Google anything and stuff comes up, and you go, oh, wait a minute, and it leads you down a path. I'm not sure that's really being a historian. That's just killing time on Google, but I did stumble across a few things that were pertinent, some aerial photos that were done in 1921 that showed, northern Manhattan. And looking at them, you can really see how things have changed and the nature of the. But the biggest thing for me was reading through that historical document that the DAR had put together when the city acquired the property in 1903. And I would have loved to have actually read through an archive, I forget what the name of the newspaper is, the Mercury News or whatever the historical, let's see, it's here, New York Gazette. I would have loved to have found a copy of the New York Gazette that had that advertisement in there for the property. But again, I had to make do with their research to do that. I didn't have the time or really the knowledge of how to go about doing that. But that was the most fun thing, is reading the history and then trying to figure out how that related. What do I photograph? And that was an enormous, spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I shot a lot of stuff, and some didn't work and some did. Um, uh, and once I kind of hit upon the idea of trying to imagine myself standing in Stephen or Eliza Jamel's shoes, or Ernest Lawson when he was painting, or what it would have been like to have been a soldier in the Battle of Fort Washington, it gave me a little bit more of a feeling of how to approach the photography. And obviously there's nothing, to me, it's a little bit more about reverse time travel, really thinking about, I think it's easier for us to imagine what New York looked like when it was farmland, because we all know what farms look like. But think about it from Stephen Jamel or Colonel Morris's perspective, they would have no clue as to what a modern city would have been like. I mean, they didn't even know electricity. The idea of, a modern city. So, if he was standing on what was, the northeast corner of his property, he's looking out over the Bronx and an industrial landscape. And I figured I'd honor that kind of idea that way. At least that's in the back of my head what drove the decisions of where to photograph.
All right. So Liz is curious to know if this project will ever sort of bloom into a book that, encompasses a larger area of northern Manhattan.
Probably not. I would love for that to happen. I think one of the fantastic things that made this project happen, and I have to. This was a New York State Council on the Arts grant that Shiloh had put together it was submitted by Morris-Jumel to get funding to do this project, and subsidizing it myself would have been almost impossible. And I am really thankful that that came through. But never say never. I feel like I've keeping this to the perspective of Morris-Jumel. I have a few other ideas of what I want to do for projects moving forward that don't involve this stuff. So, I'm at the point now where I think I've done as much thinking about this project as I can. And it's been a fantastic experience, particularly learning the history of the area, and that I will certainly carry forward. But I really don't have any plans of kind of expanding this, or at least not presently.
Catherine is curious about the opening. So yes, it does open this Saturday. There is a formal opening. I know very little about it.
It's 1 to 3, if I'm correct.
So
I'm going to be there 1 to 3. I don't know if anyone else will be, but it's Saturday 1 to 3.
I'll also be there. Where else am I going to be? But so if I were you, I would email info@morrisjumel.org. And we all have access to that email, and someone who has the answer will provide you details on the formal opening. But it is definitely Saturday, and it will be open until February, like you said. So come and see it. I'm very excited. I think we have time for maybe one more question if anyone had one, or I will steal it if. Well, I'll steal it. So I'm curious, you kind of mentioned the sort of challenges of taking these pictures. I'm wondering if there was sort of any moments of like frustration of like you're standing there and you're like, where could this possibly have been? I'm sitting here on this street, but I'm having a hard time orienting myself.
Well, the frustration part of it had nothing. For me, and I've been doing the photography for so long that the actual photography to me is like the most fun and easy. The frustration for this project came in a much different way, and that was the photograph that you're looking at here now. This the view that matches up with the Davies drawing from the Revolutionary War. I'm used to trying to get access to places. The hardest thing in this city is to find viewpoints to photograph buildings from. And often what happens is the people whose building you need to get up to the roof of, or property you need to get on, they have nothing to do with the building that you're trying to photograph. It's a neighbor, but two different businesses. So I thought I'd be able to go over to Bronx Community College and just photograph from the campus, but trees and all kinds of things were in the way. So what I needed to do was get up on the roof of one of their lecture halls. And so the long story short is it took probably 4 months to even get anybody to answer an email. And it turns out it was, again, this lovely idea of neighborhood and neighbors. And I was talking about the project to a friend of mine that gardens in Isham Park, and her husband's an architect, and they happen to work on Bronx Community College. And I got the name of a guy and finally get in there. That was, the biggest, the frustration was getting access to places. The idea of what to photograph was never really a problem. If the photos don't work, they don't work. But it's really, I look at it as like I need to make them work. I spent a lot of time in parts of High Bridge Park. For those of you that know Northern Manhattan, there's the speedway that runs up from the Harlem River Drive to 155th Street. And that's the eastern part of the Jumel property, was these, the rocks and cliffs there. And it's basically kind of lonely park with, folks that are living in there. And, so kind of tromping around the woods is, your sentences are heightened. It's not that it's dangerous, but you're by yourself in a remote part of the city that can be uncomfortable at times. So those were I think the two things that, in the end, it all worked out. So
We're glad. So I think as one sort of quick wrap up question, I'll ask if there is sort of one thing that you could ask like the visitor take home. Like if you have a perfect world and you're like, every single visitor is going to take this message home from these pictures, what would you hope that would be?
That's an excellent question. And I think I hope they would get the sense of the history of the property by kind of imagining what Stephen and Eliza Jumel and the Morrises and Washington would think of New York City of 2023. It's like, all right, I was here in 1776 watching the city burn and I'm trying to direct my troops. What would they think of New York in the present day? And, of this neighborhood? Obviously, it's that. I think if folks take away nothing but that, just being able to imagine somebody looking out over what was their property, and seeing what has become of it. That little bit of wonder. I think you can imagine it most with that tree. That tree has been here for 300 years, and certainly for me, that was like, I loved photographing that. It's beautiful is not what I would describe the photograph, but that's not my intent. Is I'm not don't want to make a pretty picture of the tree, but really to document this survivor there, and extend that out to how everyone that came through the Jumel property would see this city today.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting to think that they all would have seen that tree.
Right.
They would
Yes. But in the context of what's now, Washington Heights, is, I can't imagine what they would think of a modern city. But because that's the only way I can photograph this stuff, is what's here. There's a lot you can do in Photoshop and AI, and you traveling back in time, but that's not what this project was. So.
Right. Well, that's just about time. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for coming, but also thank you to Bruce for talking with us tonight. It has been so much fun. I am so excited to see the pictures, and to tell everyone about it. This is sort of like one of my favorite things to think about, is like what things look like then, what things look like now. It's why I work in an old house. But yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, and for everyone who's joining us virtually, come see the exhibition starting on Saturday. It'll be here for a while. It'll be on the second floor in that big old area, so we're so excited to have it. And thank you for joining. So I will end the Zoom now, but thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks. Take care.